Building 84, South Bend, Indiana. 6 stories of reinforced concrete and glass designed by Albert Kahn in 1923, standing at the southern edge of downtown like a cathedral built for steel instead of prayer. If your grandfather drove an American car in the 1950s, the body that kept his family safe may have been welded, ground, leaded, painted, trimmed, and assembled inside this single building. 1 floor per process, bottom to top, like a vertical assembly line open to the sky. At its peak in 1950, the factory campus around Building 84 employed 24,000 workers and produced 343,000 automobiles in a single year. Studebaker had been building things in South Bend since 1852. Wagons for the Civil War, carriages for the Gilded Age, cars for every decade of the 20th century. It survived the Depression. It survived 2 world wars. It survived the arrival of the assembly line, the rise of the highway system, and the consolidation of an entire industry around 3 companies in Detroit. A brand with that record should still be making cars today. It isn't. On December 9, 1963, Studebaker announced it would end automobile production in South Bend. At peak, 24,000 jobs. At closing, 7,000. Gone inside 2 weeks. The last Studebaker rolled off a smaller line in Hamilton, Ontario on March 17, 1966. 114 years of manufacturing. Finished. Not because of a scandal. Not because of a recall. Not because a single executive made a single catastrophic bet. Not because the cars were bad. Some were among the most admired designs of their generation. On the 3rd floor of Building 84, the floor workers called the death floor. Leadmen spent entire careers smoothing body panel seams by hand. A leadman with 15 years on that floor could feel a ripple in a body seam through his palm before any gauge could register it. He could hear the difference between a properly bonded joint and a weak one by the pitch of his file across the surface. He could see, under the flat overhead light, a distortion in the metal that wouldn't show up until paint day, 2 floors above him. That knowledge lived nowhere except in his hands, his ears, and his eyes. The industry didn't replace it with machines. It eliminated the conditions that required it by eliminating the company that valued it. How does a car maker with a century of expertise and a factory full of irreplaceable skill end up shutting its doors while its competitors thrive? Why does a merger designed to save 2 companies instead accelerate the death of both? And what disappears from an industry, from a country, when the places that train people to know things by touch simply stop existing? This is the story of what happens when an industry prices survival above craft, and craft has no seat at the table where survival gets decided. The rise, the peak, and the slow, quiet extinction of Studebaker. Stay close. South Bend, Indiana. 1852. 2 brothers named Clement and Henry Studebaker open a blacksmith shop on the edge of town. They have almost nothing. A small forge, a handful of tools. And one bet. Americans are moving west, and every single one of them needs a wagon. They are right. Within a decade, the Studebaker brothers are building wagons for the Union Army during the Civil War. Thousands of them. Heavy, durable, built to survive roads that barely exist. When the war ends, the demand doesn't stop. It shifts. Settlers, farmers, merchants, the entire westward expansion of the United States rolls on Studebaker wheels. By the 1870s, the Studebaker Brothers Manufacturing Company is the largest wagon builder in the world. Not in Indiana, not in the Midwest, the world. This matters because Studebaker doesn't enter the 20th century as some scrappy startup trying to figure out what a car is. It enters as an industrial dynasty, a name that Americans already trust with their lives, their cargo, their families. When the automobile revolution begins, Studebaker doesn't scramble to catch up. It walks in through the front door. The transition from wagons to cars happens gradually. Studebaker partners with electric and gasoline car builders in the early 1900s, testing the waters. By 1912, the company is producing its own automobiles. And here is what separates Studebaker from the dozens of other early car makers popping up across Michigan and Ohio and Indiana. It already has the factories. It already has the workforce. It already has the dealer network and the national reputation. Most early automakers are born fragile. Studebaker is born with a century of muscle behind it. By the 1920s, Studebaker is a legitimate force in the American car market. It's not Ford, it's not General Motors, but it doesn't need to be. It occupies a profitable middle ground, well-built, reasonably priced cars for Americans who want something better than the cheapest option but can't afford a Cadillac. The company sells hundreds of thousands of vehicles. The South Bend factory complex expands into a sprawling industrial campus. Workers pour in. The city and the company become almost the same thing. Then the Depression hits. 1933. The American auto industry is on its knees. Sales have collapsed. Factories are silent from Detroit to Toledo. And Studebaker, stretched thin by debt and falling revenue, is forced into receivership, not bankruptcy. Receivership. The distinction matters. The company isn't dead. It's on life support, and the question is whether anyone can restart its heart. Two men do, Harold Vance and Paul Hoffman, both Studebaker executives, lead the company out of receivership by 1935. They cut costs. They renegotiate debt. They keep the factory running just enough to survive. And when the economy begins to recover, Studebaker recovers with it. By the late 1930s, the company is profitable again, scarred, leaner, but alive. World War II changes everything, for everyone. Studebaker pivots to military production, trucks, aircraft engines. The massive output builds cash reserves and sharpens the manufacturing operation. When the war ends in 1945, Studebaker does something almost nobody expects. It beats the big three to market. While Ford and GM and Chrysler are still retooling from military production, Studebaker releases new post-war car designs first. The 1947 Starlight Coupe, styled by the legendary Raymond Loewy studio, is unlike anything on the road. It looks like the future. Americans notice. Studebaker sells over 190,000 cars in 1950. The brand is hot. The factories are humming. South Bend is booming. And right here, at this exact moment, is where the story that everyone tells about Studebaker starts to diverge from the story that actually matters. Because the popular version says Studebaker made bad cars, or ugly cars, or fell behind on styling. That's not what happened. The truth is more painful and more interesting. Studebaker's problem was never the product. It was the math underneath the product. The big three, Ford, GM, Chrysler, don't just make cars. They make cars at a scale that allows them to spread costs across millions of units. New tooling, new dies, new factory equipment. These are massive fixed investments. When you build 3 million cars a year, that cost per unit shrinks to almost nothing. When you build 200,000, it crushes you. Studebaker is building good cars, sometimes great cars, but every single one costs more to produce than the equivalent from Detroit. And in the early 1950s, when the post-war seller's market ends and real competition returns, that cost gap becomes a slow-moving emergency. The company knows it, the executives know it, the accountants know it, and in the boardrooms of South Bend, a conversation starts that will define everything that follows. The conversation isn't about how to build a better car. It's about how to survive without the money to keep building cars the way the industry now demands. That conversation leads to a decision, and that decision will become the most important choice in Studebaker's entire 100-year history. Not because it was obviously wrong, but because it looks so obviously right. To understand why Studebaker's boardroom is getting desperate by 1953, you need to understand what the Big Three are doing to the American car market. They are weaponizing scale. After the post-war boom fades, Ford and GM and Chrysler start playing a game that only giants can play: annual model changes, massive advertising budgets, dealer incentives, price wars. Every year, the cost of staying competitive goes up. New sheet metal, new chrome, new tooling, new everything. And every year, the companies that can spread those costs across millions of units get stronger, while the companies that can't get weaker. This isn't a conspiracy. It's just math. But it's math that works like gravity: invisible, constant, and merciless. Studebaker feels it immediately. In the early 1950s, the company is selling cars, but the margins are paper thin. Every retooling cycle is a financial crisis. Every new model year is a gamble. The factory in South Bend is enormous, built for wartime volume, and now the overhead of maintaining that capacity is eating the company alive. Too many workers for too few cars, too much factory for too little demand, too much fixed cost for too little flexibility. The numbers start to bleed. In 1953, Studebaker posts a loss, not a catastrophic one, not yet, but enough to confirm what the accountants have been whispering for 2 years. At current volumes, with current costs, the company cannot sustain itself indefinitely. And here's the cruel part. It's not that Studebaker is building bad cars. The 1953 Studebaker lineup, especially the Starliner Coupe designed by Robert Burke of the Loewy Studio, is considered one of the most beautiful American cars of its era. Designers love it, critics love it. But beauty doesn't fix a cost structure. You can have the most admired car on the road and still lose money on every single one you build. So what do? If you're Ford, you invest billions and outproduce everyone. If you're GM, you leverage your divisions and drown the market in options. If you're Chrysler, you lean on engineering and fight for your slice. But if you're Studebaker, you don't have billions. You don't have 5 divisions. You don't have the volume to fight a price war. You have a proud name, a beautiful factory, a loyal workforce, and a cost problem that gets worse every single quarter. The boardroom conversation shifts. It's no longer about how to compete alone. It's about who to merge with. The logic feels airtight. If Studebaker combines with another independent automaker, the merged company can share tooling costs, consolidate factories, combine dealer networks, and create enough volume to compete with the Big Three. On paper, it's the rational move, the only move. The name that rises to the top of every conversation is Packard. Packard, another American icon, a company that once built the most prestigious luxury cars in the country. A name that still carries weight, even though Packard's own sales have been declining for years. Packard has something Studebaker needs: cash reserves and a reputation for quality. Studebaker has something Packard needs: volume and a broader market presence. In the boardrooms of both companies, the math seems to add up. Together, they could become the fourth force in the American auto industry. A genuine alternative to the Big Three. A combined entity with enough scale to retool, enough dealers to distribute, and enough brand power to survive. James J. Nance, Packard's ambitious president, pushes hard for the deal. He sees himself as the man who will build an empire out of 2 struggling companies. He's confident, aggressive, and convinced that consolidation is the answer to everything. On October 1, 1954, the merger is approved. Studebaker Packard Corporation is born. The headlines are optimistic. Industry analysts call it a bold move. Dealers are hopeful. Workers in South Bend and at Packard's Detroit plant allow themselves to believe that the worst might be over. But mergers don't fix math. They rearrange it. The new company doesn't suddenly have GM's volume. It doesn't suddenly have Ford's capital. What it has is 2 sets of factories, 2 sets of tooling, 2 sets of overhead, and a combined sales number that still doesn't come close to the break-even point needed to compete with the giants. Worse, the merger creates new problems. Integrating two companies with different cultures, different engineering philosophies, and different dealer networks is expensive and slow. The savings that were supposed to come from consolidation don't materialize fast enough. The revenue that was supposed to come from a stronger combined brand doesn't appear. Instead, the losses accelerate. By 1956, the Smithsonian would later note, Studebaker Packard posts a staggering $43 million loss. $43 million. In 1956 dollars, that's not a wound, that's hemorrhaging. And the credit situation is even more frightening. By April of 1956, reporting reveals that the company has burned through a massive portion of its available bank credit. They aren't just losing money. They're losing the ability to borrow money. The oxygen is running out. The merger that was supposed to create a fourth giant has instead created a larger, more expensive way to lose. James Nance, the man who was supposed to be the architect of a new empire, is gone from the company before the year is out. The dream of rivaling the Big Three is dead. And Studebaker Packard is left with a question that no merger can answer. How do you survive when the math says you can't? By late 1956, Studebaker Packard is a company running on fumes. The merger hasn't worked. Packard car production is already finished. The last real Packards rolled off the line in 1956, and what comes after are just rebadged Studebakers wearing a famous name like a borrowed suit. The combined company is bleeding cash, burning credit, and watching its dealer network thin out month by month. The board needs a miracle. What they get instead is a deal. Curtiss-Wright Corporation, a defense and aerospace conglomerate with roots going back to the Wright brothers themselves, steps in with a management agreement. The arrangement, struck in 1956, is complicated on paper, but simple in its meaning. Curtiss-Wright takes over management responsibility for Studebaker Packard's operations. In return, Curtiss-Wright gets access to Studebaker Packard's tax losses, which are enormous and enormously valuable to a profitable defense contractor looking to reduce its tax burden. Read that again. The most valuable thing Studebaker Packard has to offer isn't its cars. It isn't its factories. It isn't its century-old brand name. It's the sheer scale of its financial losses. That's the asset. That's what brings Curtiss-Wright to the table. This is what survival looks like when the math has already turned against you. You don't sell products, you sell your wounds. The Curtiss-Wright deal does accomplish one thing. It buys time. The management agreement brings in some stability, some cash flow, and a sense that someone with deep pockets is at least standing nearby. But it doesn't solve the fundamental problem. Curtiss-Wright isn't in the car business. It has no interest in investing hundreds of millions into new car tooling, new car designs, new car factories. It's a defense company managing an automaker's slow decline in exchange for a tax advantage. The workers in South Bend know this. Maybe not in boardroom detail, but in the way that factory workers always know. You can feel it when investment stops flowing, when the equipment doesn't get replaced, when the talk shifts from next year's model to next quarter's survival. The cars keep coming off the line, but the energy behind them changes. Pride is still there. These are skilled people building real things with their hands. But pride operates on a different frequency than capital, and capital is what the industry demands. Here's what the Curtiss-Wright period reveals about Studebaker's real disease. The problem isn't management, though management has made mistakes. The problem isn't the workers. They're as capable as any in Detroit. The problem isn't even the cars themselves, which remain competent and sometimes genuinely innovative. The problem is the gap between what it costs to stay in the American car business and what Studebaker can afford to spend. That gap exists in 1954. The merger doesn't close it. The Curtiss-Wright deal doesn't close it. Nothing closes it, because closing it would require either a massive infusion of capital that nobody is willing to provide, or a volume of sales that the market simply won't deliver to a company perceived as fragile. and perception is its own kind of death spiral. When customers start to wonder whether a car company will exist in 5 years, they stop buying its cars. Not because the cars are bad, because nobody wants to own an orphan, a vehicle whose manufacturer has vanished, leaving no parts supply, no warranty support, no dealer network. The mere rumor of weakness becomes weakness itself. Studebaker is caught in this loop by the late 1950s. The company needs sales to generate cash. It needs cash to invest in new models. It needs new models to generate sales. And hovering over all of it is the whisper that follows every independent automaker in this era. How long can they last? But then something happens that nobody, not the board, not Curtiss Wright, not the Big Three, quite expects. Studebaker builds a hit. In 1959, the company introduces the Lark. It's a compact car smaller than the standard American land yachts of the late 1950s. It's practical, economical, and priced right. And it arrives at exactly the moment when a slice of the American market is getting tired of paying for 2 tons of chrome and tail fins just to drive to work. The Lark sells. It sells well. Studebaker's numbers jump sharply in 1959. The company swings back toward profitability. Headlines shift from obituary to resurrection. The Lark is proof, people say, that Studebaker still knows how to read the market, that the old company still has fight in it. For a brief electric moment, it feels like the story might have a different ending. But here's the thing about miracles in a business that runs on scale. A miracle only works if you can defend it. And defending it costs exactly the kind of money Studebaker doesn't have. The Big Three see the compact market open up, and they respond the way the Big Three always respond, with overwhelming force. Ford launches the Falcon. Chevrolet launches the Corvair. Chrysler launches the Valiant. 3 massive corporations, each with billions in resources, each capable of tooling up a new car line in months, each with dealer networks that blanket every town in America. Studebaker's Lark doesn't get outperformed, it gets outscaled. The Big Three compacts aren't necessarily better cars, but they come backed by the full weight of companies that can advertise nationally, discount aggressively, and update annually without blinking. By 1960, the Lark surge is already fading. The window of opportunity didn't just close. It was slammed shut by 3 companies with more money, more dealers, and more tooling capacity than Studebaker could ever match. The miracle proved something important. Studebaker could still design a car that people wanted. It could still read the market. It could still move fast and think smart. But being smart isn't the same as being funded. And in the American auto industry of the 1960s, funded is the only thing that keeps the lights on. The Lark wasn't a failure. It was something worse. It was proof that even success wasn't enough. The early 1960s are when Studebaker stops being just a business story and becomes a human one. In South Bend, the factory is the city's heartbeat. Thousands of families depend on it. Grocery stores, barbershops, gas stations, schools, the entire local economy orbits around that sprawling industrial campus like planets around a sun. When the factory is busy, South Bend thrives. When the factory hesitates, South Bend holds its breath. By 1962, the factory is doing a lot of hesitating. Sales are declining again after the Lark's brief surge. The compact market that Studebaker cracked open has been flooded by the Big Three. The company is cycling through strategies, new models, new trims, new marketing angles. But none of them generate the volume needed to cover the enormous fixed costs of running a full-scale automobile factory. Every quarter, the gap between revenue and overhead gets a little wider. Every quarter, the whisper gets a little louder. And then the whisper goes national. In 1962, Chet Huntley, one of the most trusted news anchors in America, runs a segment framing Studebaker's situation as a fight for survival. This is network television, broadcast into millions of living rooms. The story isn't about a car company struggling with margins. It's about a storied American brand on the edge of extinction. It's dramatic, it's emotional, and it is absolutely devastating for sales. Because here's what happens when the national media tells America that a car company might die. America stops buying that company's cars. It's rational behavior, completely rational. If you're a family in Ohio or Pennsylvania or California and you're about to spend $2,000 on a new car, the second biggest purchase of your life after your house, are you going to bet on the company that CBS just told you might not exist next year? Are you going to risk owning an orphan? No parts, no warranty, no dealer to take it back to. The answer for most Americans is obvious. You buy the Ford. You buy the Chevy. You buy the safe bet. This is the orphan spiral, and it is almost impossible to escape. Weakness becomes visible. Visibility kills demand. Kill demand creates more weakness. Each turn of the cycle strips away another layer of the company's ability to fight back. The labor situation makes everything harder. Studebaker's workforce is unionized under the United Auto Workers, led nationally by Walter Reuther, one of the most powerful labor figures in American history. The workers in South Bend aren't unreasonable. They know the company is struggling, but they also know that they've been told the company is struggling for years now, and every time the sacrifice falls on them. Pay cuts, benefit reductions, uncertainty. At some point, the willingness to absorb pain runs out. In 1962, a strike hits Studebaker. The timing is brutal. A company that can't afford to lose a single week of production loses weeks. A company that can't afford negative headlines gets more negative headlines. A company that needs every possible customer to believe in its future is instead projecting chaos. The strike eventually ends. But the damage isn't just in lost production days or negotiation costs. The damage is in the signal it sends to the market. Every dealer, every customer, every banker, every supplier. They all see the same thing, a company where even the people who build the cars aren't sure the cars will keep getting built. Inside the company, the diversification strategy is quietly becoming the real business. Studebaker Packard has been acquiring non-automotive companies, STP oil treatment, chemical operations, other industrial businesses. The logic is survival through transformation. If the car business can't sustain the company, maybe the company can sustain itself by becoming something other than a car company. This is a rational strategy. It's also an admission. When your diversification plan becomes more important than your core product, you've already decided, whether you say it out loud or not, that the core product is dying. The executives don't say it out loud. Not yet. In public, the message is still optimism. New models are coming. The Avanti, a stunning fiberglass-bodied sports car designed by Raymond Loewy, is supposed to be the statement that Studebaker is still an innovator. And the Avanti is beautiful. It's genuinely ahead of its time, but it arrives late in limited numbers, plagued by production problems. The car that was supposed to change the conversation instead confirms what everyone fears. Studebaker can still dream big, but it can't execute at scale. By the fall of 1963, the situation inside Studebaker is clear to anyone willing to look at the numbers honestly. The car business is losing money. The South Bend plant is operating well below capacity. The workforce is anxious, the dealers are nervous, and the customers are choosing safer brands. The diversified businesses are actually performing reasonably well, but they're being dragged down by the automotive division's losses. The board faces a choice, not a pleasant choice, not a hopeful choice, a surgical one. Keep the South Bend plant open and keep bleeding, or close it and try to survive as something else. The math has been building toward this moment for a decade, since the merger, since the Curtiss-Wright deal, since the Lark's brief flash of hope. Every solution has been a delay. Every rescue has been a postponement. And now the postponements have run out. December is coming, and with it, an announcement that will break a city's heart. December 9th, 1963. 3 days before Christmas bonuses are due, 17 days before families across South Bend will sit down to holiday dinners paid for by Studebaker paychecks, the company announces it will end automobile production in South Bend. Not all automobile production, not yet. The announcement specifies that car manufacturing will shift to the company's smaller plant in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. The South Bend factory, the factory that has been building things since the 1850s, the factory that armed the Union, the factory that put America on wheels, will stop making cars. The language is careful, corporate, strategic. The company frames it as a consolidation, a rational restructuring to reduce costs and preserve the automotive business on a smaller, more sustainable scale. The Hamilton plant is newer, leaner, and operates under a different cost structure. Canadian labor agreements are different, overhead is lower, volume requirements are smaller. If Studebaker's car business can survive anywhere, the logic goes, it can survive in Hamilton. But South Bend doesn't hear strategy. South Bend hears abandonment. The numbers are staggering in human terms. Thousands of workers will lose their jobs. Not over time, not gradually. The shutdown is fast. By the end of December 1963, the assembly line in South Bend will fall silent. Workers who clocked in on Monday expecting to build cars on Tuesday are told there will be no more cars to build. The ripple effect is immediate and merciless. Every business that depends on those workers' paychecks, every diner, every landlord, every car dealership, every clothing store, feels the impact within weeks. South Bend doesn't just lose a factory, it loses its economic center of gravity. The city that grew up around Studebaker now has to figure out what it is without Studebaker. And here is where the two decisions connect. The 1954 merger was supposed to prevent this moment. It was supposed to create enough scale, enough combined strength to keep the factories running and the workers employed. Instead, it created 9 years of slow deterioration, 9 years of losses, credit strain, management upheaval, and eroding market position that led directly to this announcement. The merger didn't prevent the closing, it just determined when it would happen. Think about what that means. Every dollar lost in the failed Packard integration, every quarter spent managing the Curtiss-Wright relationship instead of investing in new tooling. Every year the Lark's profits were plowed into keeping an oversized operation afloat instead of building a sustainable future. All of it was runway. And the runway just ended. Some of the South Bend workers are offered transfers to Hamilton. Most are not. Most are left to find work in a city that has just lost its largest employer, in an era before the social safety nets that later generations would take for granted. These are skilled tradespeople, welders, assemblers, machinists, painters. And their skills are real, but the market for those skills in South Bend just evaporated overnight. The shutdown is efficient. Studebaker has had practice at cutting. The machinery is cataloged. The inventory is managed. The buildings are secured. Within weeks, the vast complex begins its transformation from living factory to industrial ghost. The lights go off section by section. The parking lot's empty. The shift whistles stop. For the company's leadership, the South Bend closing is not an ending. It's supposed to be a beginning. The theory is straightforward. Shed the enormous overhead of the South Bend operation, concentrate production in Hamilton, where costs are lower, and run a smaller, tighter, profitable car company. It's the same logic that has driven every restructuring in Studebaker's recent history. Get smaller to survive. Cut to sustain. And for a moment, a strange, almost eerie moment, it works. The Hamilton operation, freed from the burden of subsidizing South Bend's overcapacity, actually operates with something close to efficiency. The cars being built there are solid. The workforce is capable. The overhead is manageable. On a pure unit economics basis, Studebaker in Hamilton makes more sense than Studebaker in South Bend ever did in its final years. But survival isn't just about unit economics, it's about trajectory. And the trajectory of a car company that has just abandoned its historic home, that builds a tiny fraction of the volume of its competitors, that has a shrinking dealer network and a brand now permanently associated with decline. That trajectory only points one direction. The Hamilton plant isn't a new beginning. It's a controlled ending. The company is profitable enough to keep the lights on, but not profitable enough to invest in the future. There's no money for a truly new car. There's no money for the tooling that would be needed to compete with the next generation of Big Three products. There's barely enough money to keep refreshing the existing models with minor updates and hope that a loyal remnant of customers keeps walking through the remaining dealers' doors. This is what a managed wind-down looks like from the inside. The cars are still real. The workers are still proud. The product is still honest. But the decision has already been made, not in a single dramatic boardroom vote, but in the accumulation of 10 years of math that never added up. Studebaker in Hamilton is a company going through the motions of being alive. Every car that rolls off the line is both a small triumph and a quiet farewell. Hamilton, Ontario, 1964. The factory is running. Cars are being built. If you walked onto the floor and didn't know the story, you might think everything was fine. It isn't. The Hamilton plant produces Studebakers at a pace that would have been a rounding error in South Bend's peak years. The volume is tiny, a few tens of thousands of cars per year, sold primarily in Canada, with a shrinking trickle exported to American dealers who haven't yet given up the franchise. The models are aging. The 1964 and 1965 Studebakers are essentially refreshed versions of designs that date back years. New grills, new trim, minor mechanical updates. Nothing that represents the kind of clean sheet investment a car company needs to stay relevant in a market that demands novelty every September. But here's the paradox that makes the Hamilton years so strange. The operation is close to profitable. Some quarters, it actually turns a small profit. With South Bend's crushing overhead gone, with a lean Canadian workforce, with minimal advertising spend and stripped-down operations, the per-unit math almost works. Almost, that word carries the entire weight of the story. Because almost profitable is not the same as sustainable. Almost profitable means you can keep the doors open this quarter and probably next quarter. It doesn't mean you can develop a new engine. It doesn't mean you can design a new body. It doesn't mean you can invest in the tooling that will let you compete with what Ford and GM and Chrysler are going to put on the market in 1967 or 1968. Almost profitable is a treadmill. You're moving, but you're not going anywhere. The Canadian Studebakers of this era are honest cars. They're not embarrassing. Some of them are genuinely likable, simple, well-proportioned, practical transportation. The workers building them are craftspeople doing their jobs with the same care they'd bring to any product. There is no decline in effort on the factory floor. The decline is above the factory floor. In the budgets, in the investment plans that don't exist, in the future that nobody is funding. The dealer network tells the real story. In the United States, Studebaker dealers are disappearing, not because they're being closed by corporate mandate, but because they're choosing to leave. A car dealer survives on traffic. Traffic comes from brand recognition, advertising, new models, and the confidence that customers will walk through the door. When all of those things are shrinking simultaneously, a dealer does the rational thing. They pick up a different franchise, they become a Dodge dealer, a Pontiac dealer, anything with a future. Every dealer that leaves makes it harder for the remaining dealers to survive. Fewer dealers means fewer points of sale. Fewer points of sale means fewer cars sold. Fewer cars sold means less revenue. Less revenue means less investment. Less investment means fewer reasons for dealers to stay. The spiral continues. In Canada, the situation is marginally better. Studebaker still has a footprint. The brand still has some loyalty. But even in Canada, the trajectory is unmistakable. The company is getting smaller every quarter, not collapsing, just fading, like a photograph left in sunlight. Meanwhile, the non-automotive parts of the Studebaker Corporation are doing fine. STP Oil Treatment is a growing brand. The company's other diversified holdings are generating steady returns. The corporate entity called Studebaker is actually healthy in every dimension except the one that carries its name. The cars are the problem. The cars have been the problem for a decade. And now, with the South Bend closure behind them and the Hamilton plant running on minimal investment, the board faces a question that is less dramatic but more final than any previous crisis. Is it worth continuing? Not can they continue. They can. The Hamilton plant could probably keep assembling cars for another year or two on the current trajectory. The question is whether it makes any business sense to do so. Every dollar spent sustaining a tiny, declining car operation is a dollar not invested in the profitable divisions. Every headline about Studebaker's struggle is a headline that affects the corporate brand. Every quarter spent managing the slow fade of an automotive business is a quarter of executive attention diverted from businesses that actually have a future. The car business isn't killing the company anymore. It's just holding it back. This is perhaps the cruelest phase of the entire story. The earlier years had drama. The merger had ambition. The Lark had hope. The South Bend closure had tragedy. But Hamilton has something worse than any of those things. Hamilton has quiet irrelevance. The company that once built wagons for the Civil War, that styled the future with Raymond Loewy, that beat the Big Three to market after the war, is now a minor regional producer assembling outdated cars in a Canadian factory while its corporate parent quietly builds a future that doesn't include automobiles. Nobody is fighting anymore. Nobody is scheming a comeback. Nobody is designing the car that will change everything. The energy that once filled the boardrooms and the design studios and the factory floors has simply dissipated. What remains is maintenance, process, routine. A factory can feel alive even while the decision above it is already final. And the decision, by late 1965, is final. The board has seen enough. The math hasn't changed. It has only confirmed what the math has been saying since the mid-1950s. Studebaker cannot compete in the automobile business at any scale that justifies continued investment. The Hamilton plant will close. Car production will end. The only question left is when. The last day comes quietly. March 17, 1966. Hamilton, Ontario. The assembly line runs one final time. The last Studebaker automobile, a cruiser sedan, rolls to the end of the line, gets its final inspection, and stops. Not because it broke, not because it failed, because there is nothing left to follow it. No fanfare, no ceremony with politicians and cameras, no smashing a champagne bottle against the hood while executives make speeches about legacy and pride. Just a car. The last car. And then silence. The workers know. They've known for weeks. The announcement came earlier in the year, and unlike South Bend's gut-punch timing, the Hamilton closing has the strange mercy of being expected. Nobody is shocked. The shock was used up years ago. What remains is something quieter and harder to name. Not grief exactly. More like the feeling of watching something inevitable finally arrive after years of watching it approach. 114 years. That's the span from the Studebaker brothers' blacksmith shop in 1852 to this last car in 1966. 114 years of building things. Wagons that crossed the plains. Carriages that filled the cities. Cars that defined eras. Military trucks that helped win wars. And now a final sedan rolling off a line in a Canadian factory that most Americans couldn't find on a map. The Studebaker Corporation itself doesn't die on March 17th. The corporate entity continues. It still owns STP. It still owns its diversified businesses. It will eventually merge with Worthington Corporation in 1967 and become Studebaker Worthington, a conglomerate with no connection to automobiles whatsoever. The name lives on in boardrooms and stock tickers for years. But the thing the name means, the cars, the factories, the idea that Studebaker is a company that builds vehicles for Americans, that ends here, on this day. With this car, the Hamilton workers file out for the last time. They collect their things. They say goodbye to people they've worked beside for years. Some of them will find jobs at other factories. Some will leave manufacturing entirely. Some will carry the experience of building Studebakers as a point of pride for the rest of their lives, telling their grandchildren about the cars they made with their own hands in a factory that doesn't exist anymore. Back in South Bend, the old factory complex is already becoming something else. Parts of it will be repurposed. Parts will sit empty for years, slowly weathering, slowly becoming the kind of ruin that photographers seek out and historians write about. The Studebaker name is still everywhere in the city, on buildings, on street signs, in the memories of tens of thousands of people whose lives were shaped by the company. But the living connection is gone. The paychecks have stopped. The shift whistles have stopped. The sound of the line has stopped. There is a specific kind of silence that only exists where thousands of people used to build one thing every day. It's not peaceful. It's not empty. It's loaded. It vibrates with the ghost of routine, the memory of hands reaching for tools, of metal being shaped, of engines being tested, of finished cars rolling into daylight for the first time. That silence settles over South Bend's factory campus, and over Hamilton's smaller plant, and over every shuttered Studebaker dealership in every small town that used to have one. The silence is the sound of math winning, because that's what happened. Strip away the drama, the headlines, the personalities, the beautiful cars, and the ugly balance sheets. Strip away the merger and the management deals and the strikes and the miracles that weren't enough. What's left is arithmetic. Studebaker needed scale it couldn't achieve. It needed capital it couldn't raise. It needed time it couldn't buy. Every move the company made from the mid-1950s onward was an attempt to solve one of those three problems without having the resources to solve any of them. The merger was supposed to provide scale. The Curtiss Wright deal was supposed to provide stability. The Lark was supposed to provide revenue. The South Bend closing was supposed to provide efficiency. Hamilton was supposed to provide just enough of everything to keep going. None of it was enough. Not because the people were wrong or the cars were bad or the effort was lacking. Because the gap between what the American auto industry demanded and what Studebaker could deliver was structural. It existed before the merger. It existed after the merger. It existed through every rescue and every miracle and every painful restructuring. And on March 17, 1966, it finally closed, not by being bridged, but by the company stepping away from the edge entirely. The last Studebaker doesn't represent failure. It represents the end of a long argument between ambition and arithmetic. Arithmetic won. It always does. Now we answer the question, not with a single villain, not with a single bad car, or a single bad decision, or a single bad leader. Studebaker's death is a system failure, a chain of choices, each one rational in isolation, that together formed a path to extinction. But if you press for the verdict, if you demand the three things that mattered most, here they are. First, the 1954 merger treated a structural problem like a corporate structure problem. Studebaker's disease was cost and scale. It cost too much to build each car, and the company didn't build enough cars to spread that cost thin. The merger with Packard didn't fix either of those things. It added a second set of problems, a second factory, a second workforce, a second brand to support, on top of the original ones. The logic was that combining two struggling companies would create one strong one. But two companies drowning in the same ocean don't save each other by holding hands. They just drown together. The $43 million loss in 1956 is the proof. The burned-through credit lines are the proof. The merger didn't create strength. It created a more complex form of weakness. Second, delayed investment became permanent underinvestment. Every year that Studebaker couldn't afford new tooling was a year it fell further behind. Every crisis that consumed cash, the merger integration, the management upheaval, the strike, was a crisis that stole money from the future. The Lark proved that Studebaker could still build a car people wanted. But building one hit isn't enough if you can't follow it up. The Big Three could launch 3 competing compacts in a single year because they had the capital to do it. Studebaker couldn't respond because the money wasn't there. It was never there. And with each passing year, the cost of catching up grew larger, while the resources available grew smaller. The tooling gap didn't just persist, it compounded. Third, the 1963 South Bend closing confirmed what the market already suspected. Once Studebaker abandoned its historic home, the signal was unmistakable. This was not a company investing in its future. This was a company managing its past. The move to Hamilton made financial sense on a spreadsheet. But cars aren't bought on spreadsheets. They're bought on confidence. And no American consumer was going to bet $2,000 on a company that had just closed its main factory and retreated across the border. The South Bend decision didn't kill Studebaker, but it made resurrection impossible. After December 1963, the only question was how long the ending would take. The answer was 27 months, 3 decisions, 3 failures. But underneath all of them runs a single truth that the auto industry has never been comfortable admitting. The real product isn't the car. The real product is capital. A car company doesn't survive by building great cars. It survives by generating enough cash to fund the next generation of great cars, and the generation after that, and the generation after that, forever. The moment that cycle breaks, the moment investment falls behind, the moment the tooling budget gets raided to cover operating losses, the moment the future gets sacrificed to pay for the present, the company is dying. It might not know it yet. It might not show it yet, but the math is already written. Studebaker's math was written by the mid-1950s. Everything after that was an argument about timing. Ford understood this. GM understood this. They didn't survive because they built better cars than Studebaker. Sometimes they didn't. They survived because they could afford to keep building new ones, year after year, cycle after cycle, billion after billion. The scale advantage wasn't just about efficiency. It was about the ability to fund perpetual reinvention. Studebaker couldn't fund it. And no merger, no management deal, no clever compact car, and no retreat to a cheaper factory could substitute for that fundamental capability. This is the lesson the industry doesn't like to talk about, because it means that quality doesn't save you, innovation doesn't save you, loyalty doesn't save you. Even being right about the market doesn't save you. The only thing that saves you is the ability to keep investing. And that ability comes from scale. And scale, once lost, almost never comes back. Today, if you drive through South Bend, you can still find pieces of the old Studebaker complex. Some of it has been repurposed. Some of it houses the Studebaker National Museum, where the cars and the wagons and the history are preserved with the care that only people who love something can provide. The buildings are clean, the exhibits are thoughtful, the pride is real. But walk outside, stand in the parking lot, look at the scale of the old campus, the sheer physical footprint of what was once one of America's great manufacturing operations, and try to hear it, not the traffic on the road, not the wind, the other sound, the one underneath, the silence. Studebaker didn't lose because it forgot how to build cars. It lost because it couldn't buy time cheaply enough to keep building them. The merger was supposed to be the answer. It became the trap. The Lark was supposed to be the miracle. It became the proof that miracles don't scale. The South Bend closing was supposed to be the surgery. It became the farewell. Was the fatal decision the merger? Or was it believing the merger could replace reinvention? Some companies die loudly, with scandals and lawsuits and congressional hearings. Studebaker died like a shift ending. The whistle blows, the lights go off, and nobody comes back.